Welcome back to another episode of Norse Studies with Zakk. We're going over the culture of the Teutons. If you haven't watched any of my episodes, they're in 10-minute intervals. We're just reading this together. Feel free to start at any episode that you've missed. Go back through my page. You can catch up with us. It's pretty easy. We're just going to go through this book together, kind of discern what Wilhelm Grönbeck is trying to say about Norse culture. He has the firmness that depends upon a structure in the soul, and the elasticity which comes from the structure's perfect harmony with its surroundings, enabling him spiritually to conform to the need of his environment. He is a master of the world about him, by virtue of a self-control, more deeply rooted even than the will, identical with the soul structure itself. In the innermost of his being, there is a central will, passing judgment upon all that penetrates from without. A purpose that seizes upon every new acquisition, seals and enslaves it to one particular service, forcing it to work in the spirit of its new master, and stamping it with his image. Where this cannot be done, the alien matter is rejected and ignored. All that it takes to itself is transmuted into power, all power subjected to discipline, and flung out then as a collective force. Thus violence, here, is not a mere extravagance of power. The central will gives to each action such an impetus that that it overshoots the mark in every case, setting a new one beyond. Thus man's whole life is lived as such a pressure of power that he himself is ever being urged on toward ever farther goals. But the scale and measure of his doing is a thing outside himself. The ultimate standards whereby his life is judged are the verdict of his fellows and the verdict of posterity. Standards are qualified and absolute. The violence is organized from the depths of the soul. It is energy that keeps the spiritual life awake and athirst, and thus creates a single-minded, firm-set personality of the Northmen. These men are not each but an aspired moment, fading vaguely away into past and future. They are present, future, and past in one. A man fixes himself in the past by firm attachment to past generations. See, so that's pretty important right there. A man fixes himself in the past by firm attachment to past generations. So Wilhelm is saying that the Teutons value their ancestors. Not necessarily their ancestry. He hasn't said anything about genetics or anything like that. He's saying about their ancestors. So I think it's fair to say that they value tradition, skills, stories, things that were passed down from generation to generation, and they wanted to honor and live by their ancestors. Such an attachment is found more or less among all peoples, but the Northman makes the past a living and guiding force by constant historic remembrance and historic speculation, in which he traces out his connection with former generations and his dependence on their deeds. His future is linked up with the present by aim and honor and the judgment of posterity. And he fixes himself in the present by reproducing himself in an ideal type. Such a type, for instance, as that of the chieftain, generous, brave, fearless, quick-witted, stern towards his enemies, faithful to his friends, and frank with all. The type is built up out of life and poetry together, first lived and then transfused in poetry. This firmness of spiritual organization which characterizes the Northman as a personality is no less evident in his social life. Wherever he goes, he carries within himself a social structure which manifests itself in definite political forms as soon as he is thrown together with a crowd of others speaking the same tongue. He is not of the inarticulate type which forms kaleidoscopic tribal communities. However small his people may be, and however slight the degree of cohesion between its component molecules, the social consciousness is always present and active. He is a people in himself, and has no need of building up an artificial whole by the massing of numbers together. As soon as he has settled in a place, for a little while, or for a length of time, a law thing shoots up out of the ground. And about it grows a community. Whether his sense of social order finds scope to form a kingdom, or is constrained within, page 7, narrower bounds. It is a tendency deep-rooted, part and parcel of his character itself. Culture, in the truest sense of the word, means an elastic harmony between man's inner self and his surroundings, so that he is able not only to make his environment serve his material ends, but also to transfigure the impulses of the surrounding world into spiritual ideals and aspirations. So, what is he saying about culture? He's saying culture is more about what you aspire to be and following spiritual ideals. So a lot of times we think culture of a group of people or a country or something like that. We group certain people that look a certain way or are a certain way, and we consider them a culture. But he's saying that culture is spiritual ideals and aspirations. It's pretty interesting because a lot of people believe culture comes from genetics and your ancestry, when in reality, if you're not practicing the way your ancestors did, you're not practicing their culture. So, for instance, you can say that you hear this all the time, I'm Viking. I'm Viking because of my ancestry, when really that's not the case. The case is, are you practicing their spiritual ideals and aspiring to those spiritual ideals? The cultured man possesses an instinctive dignity which springs from fearlessness and self-reliance, and manifests itself in sureness of aims and means alike in matters of formal behavior and in undertakings of far-reaching consequence. In this sense, these Vikings are men of character. They possess themselves and their world in lordly right of determination. Their harmony may be poor in the measure of its actual content, but is nonetheless powerful and deep. What a difference between these two pictures, the portrait Southern pens have drawn of their Germanic contemporaries, and that which the last of the Germanic race have themselves imprinted in history. Yet for all that, we group them together under one name, and we do so, moreover, advisedly, fully conscious of what it implies. So I think what he's saying right there is the culture of the Teutons, the Vikings, Norse, carry the same name, and we regard them as the same people as the ancient Christians described. And what he's saying is, even after we're advised otherwise, even after we fully understand that they are not, the Vikings, the Norse, were not what the Christians described, we still place these thoughts on them. You know, for instance, the horns on the helmets, right? We still associate the horns on the helmets with Norse. Even though we know, and we have known for a long time, that that's just not what it is. I'm going to stop right there. If you guys want to get something else out of these videos, if you want them to be longer, if you want them to be shorter, please comment below. Rate, comment, subscribe. It helps me out. Otherwise, we'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.